Part 1. Called to Prayer. The edifice of my worldview. All I had ever known. Chapter 1. Prayers of my fathers. At dawn across the Islamic world, sonorous voices usher the sun over the horizon. The core beliefs of Muslims are repeatedly proclaimed from rooftops and minarets, beginning with the takbir. Allahu Akbar, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Ashhadu anna Muhammadur Rasul Allah. Allah is great. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. I bear witness that Muhammad is the messenger of Allah. It is the start of the adhan, the call to prayer. The call reminds Muslims to dedicate their lives to Allah the very moment they awaken. From memorized occasional prayers to elaborate daily rituals, devout Muslims are steeped in remembrance of Allah and performance of Islamic traditions. The adhan calls the Muslims, resonates within them, rallies them, and brings them together in unified prostration before Allah. To the alien observer, it might seem that the adhan is the very thing that rends the night sky, separating dark from day, infusing life into Muslim lands and people. It is no surprise, then, that Muslims use the adhan not just to awaken one another for the day, but also to awaken one another into life. It is a hadith, a tradition of the Prophet Muhammad, that every Muslim child should hear the adhan at birth. When I was born, my father softly spoke the adhan into my ear, echoing the words that his father had whispered to him 28 years earlier. They were the first words ever spoken to me, in accordance with tradition. My family has always paid particular attention to following the hadith. We are Qureshi, after all, and the Qureshi are the tribe of Muhammad. When I was old enough to realize the prestige of our name, I asked my father if we inherited it from the Prophet. Abba, are we the real Qureshi, like Muhammad? He said, Ji mera beta, Urdu for, yes, my son. Muhammad had no sons who survived childhood, but we are descendants of Hazrat Umar. Umar was one of the 4 Khalifas, the men that Sunnis consider the divinely guided successors of Muhammad. Our lineage was noble indeed. It's no wonder my family was proud of our heritage. When my father left Pakistan in the 1970s, love for his family and heritage was his motivation. He was driven to provide a better life for his parents and siblings. When he came to the United States, he joined the Navy at the instruction of his older brother. As a seaman, he sent money from every paycheck back home, even when it was all he had. It would be a few years before he briefly returned to Pakistan, once his marriage to my mother had been arranged. Ammi, my mother, had also lived a life devoted to her family and her religion. She was the daughter of a Muslim missionary. Her father, whom I called Nana Abu, had moved to Indonesia with her mother, Nani Ami, shortly after their marriage to invite people to Islam. It was there that my mother was born, followed by her 3 sisters. With Nani Ami working to help support the family and Nana Abu often absent on mission, my mother had a large role in raising her younger siblings and teaching them the way of Islam. At the age of 10, Ami returned to Pakistan with her siblings and Nani Ami. The community received her family with great respect for dutifully performing the call of missionaries. Since Nana Abu was still an active missionary in Indonesia and returned to Pakistan only on furlough, Ami's caretaking role in the home intensified. Ultimately, she had 5 siblings to manage and care for, so although she graduated at the top of her undergraduate class and was offered a scholarship for medical school, she declined the offer. Nani Ami needed the help at home, since she invested much of her day volunteering as a secretary at the local Jamaat offices. Nani Ami herself had spent virtually all her life sacrificing in the way of Islam. Not only was she the wife of a missionary, but, like Ami, she had also been the child of a missionary. She was born in Uganda, where her father served as a physician while calling people to Islam. Raised as a missionary child, transitioning into the role of missionary wife, and living her last able years serving the Jamaat, she had garnered great respect and prestige from the community. Through it all, Nani Ami was perhaps Ami's greatest role model, and Ami wanted nothing more than to carry on the legacy through a family of her own. And so, though I did not know it at the time, the man who whispered the adhan into my ears was a self-sacrificial, loving man who bore the noble name of Qureshi. The woman who looked on was a daughter of missionaries, an experienced caretaker with an ardent desire to serve Islam. I was their second child, their firstborn son. They were calling me to prayer. Chapter 2. A Mother's Faith. I lived a very protected childhood, physically, emotionally, socially, and otherwise ineffably. I was sheltered in ways I am still trying to comprehend. The few scars I have from those days are all physical, results of minor mishaps, and they come with vivid memories. The largest scar, no more than 2 inches, mind you, was from an open window that fell on my hand when I was 3. That day is emblazoned on my mind because of what I learned about my mother's faith. At the time, Abba was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. He was in his 11th year with the Navy, having spent the past few working by day and studying by night for a master's degree. After officer commissioning school, he was promoted from petty officer first class to lieutenant junior grade, and he was deployed shortly afterward. Of course, I didn't know much of that at the time. All I knew was that Abba worked hard for us, and though I never felt a lack of love, I didn't get to see him as much as I wanted. Ammi, on the other hand, was an ever-present ballast and encouraging influence in our lives. She always seemed able to do everything, from making our food to preparing our clothes to teaching us the Aqidah. She never seemed to fatigue or complain. She had only 2 hard and fast rules for her sanity: no whining after 9 o'clock at night, and no interrupting her while she was drinking chai, which she did quite often. When we had visitors, she exemplified the highest caliber of hospitality, considering it an honor to receive and serve our guests. More food would be prepared than the visitors could hope to eat. The house would be cleaner than the day it was built. Our clothes would be crisply pressed, and our calendar would be cleared for the day of the visit and the next, in case the guests chose to stay. It was normal for us when she deeply apologized for the lack of food and our unkempt appearances anyway. It was part of the protocol. The guests knew to assure Ammi that they had not had such wonderful food in years, that homes in heaven couldn't be much cleaner, and that her children were role models for theirs. At this, everyone would be quite content. The guests for being so honored, Ammi for being so praised, and we kids just for being mentioned in grown-up conversation. Sometimes the guests would stay with us for months at a time, Ammi's hospitality and diplomacy never waning. When I consider the array of people who stayed at our home, 2 of the most prominent are Nani Ammi and her older sister, whom we called Mama. Mama was a delightful woman, a big heart with a big laugh in a tiny body. She was always ready to play board games with me, unending in her patience for 3-year-olds, and always willing to look the other way when I cheated. On the day of the mishap, Mama was at our home. She and Ammi were upstairs, and I was playing with my Hot Wheels, little toy cars that Ammi would buy me so I would stop annoying her in the grocery stores. Baji, my older sister, and I had a mutual understanding. She would play with me and my Hot Wheels if I played with her and her My Little Pony collection. She'd choose the cars she wanted, and I'd pick the ponies I wanted. I chose my ponies brazenly, spending the rest of my time convincing Baji that I had picked the best one. She'd always pick the Lamborghini, and I'd spend the rest of my time convincing her that the Pontiac I was left with was better. Baji had just finished playing with my Hot Wheels and had gone to get the ponies while I continued playing with my Pontiac, racing it along the floor and in between the couches. I looked up and saw the window, the kind that slides up to open. On a whim, I decided it was time for the Pontiac to crash. I raced the car along the windowsill with a gust of finality and slammed it against the pane. To this day, I cannot recall the window actually coming down. I just remember the piercing pain, the immense amount of blood, and my scream for Ammi amid gasping sobs. And I recall what happened next. When Ammi came downstairs and saw the accident, she almost began to cry herself, but in the very next instant she stayed her emotions. Being a Navy wife, she had learned to play the roles of both mother and father, and now was not the time for tears. She chose instead to act swiftly and give her fear to Allah. She raised the window, wrapped my hand in a towel, and deftly donned her burqa, leaving Baji under Mama's care. Ammi lifted me into the car to take me to the clinic. The whole way there, Ami recited dua. She offered dua from the portions of the Quran, from sections of hadith she had memorized, and by impromptu prayers of her own. Her dependence on the sovereign care of Allah gave her strength, firmed her resolve, and allayed her fears. When we arrived at the clinic, I had a rude introduction to the concept of stitches. The doctor tried to dismiss Ami so she would not have to watch, but I refused to be separated from her. As they stitched my hand, Ami continued to pray audibly, indifferent to the questioning looks of the doctors and nurses. American Muslims were not common in those days, much less a naval officer's Muslim wife who was wearing a full burqa and murmuring aloud in Arabic and Urdu. Her resolute duas and her steadfast reliance upon Allah, even in the face of a screaming child and judging eyes, was a testimony of her faith that I have never forgotten. Throughout the rest of my childhood, she taught me many duas from the Quran and Hadith, and I guarded them close to my heart because I knew their power. I had seen them strengthen her in a time of fear and need, and that left a mark on me far deeper than any physical scar. Chapter 3. A Community of Four. As I grew, I felt like my family and I never really fit in with the people around us. I had always felt disheartened thinking about it. Aside from the Islamic traditionalism, my life was a mix of 1980s cartoons, plastic toys, and temper tantrums. I should have fit in with the other boys just fine. Unfortunately, people are afraid of what they do not know, and my Muslim heritage was a deterrent for many would-be friends and their families. I was very lonely. What made it even worse was that the Navy moved my family fairly regularly. We never had time to develop any roots. Most of my early memories are snapshots of either moving out of a house, traveling to a new one, or settling in and learning to call a new place home. But these memories are still dear to me, and I vividly remember, for instance, our move when it was time to leave Virginia. As strangers took our furniture, I stood by the screen door on the front porch crying. I cried inconsolably, not understanding who these men were or what I had done to deserve this fate, but Ami was there to comfort me. True, she chuckled at times, and I do remember some teasing when my favorite chair was taken away by a stranger, but I also remember her consoling caress and her comforting voice. "Kya baat hai?" she asked as she took my face into her hands and drew it close in embrace. "Kya baat hai, mera beta?" What's the matter, my son? They took the chair, the one with strawberries. And is the chair more important to you than your Ami? I'm still here, and so are Abba and Baji. Allah has given you everything. What more do you need, Bilou? Bilou was the nickname that only my parents used for me, and they used it specifically when they wanted to express their love. They rarely said "I love you" directly. That is too crass for traditional Pakistani ears. Love is implicit and understood, expressed through provision by the parents and obeisance by children. That implicitness is one reason why a child's obedience is paramount in Muslim culture. In my teen years, Ami would often reprimand my obstinacy by saying, "What good is it to tell me you love me when you don't do what I say?" Later still, when I was considering following Jesus, I knew I was contemplating the one choice that would be far and away the greatest disobedience. Not only would my parents feel betrayed, they would be utterly heartbroken. But at the sheltered age of 4, heartbreak and family strife were the farthest things from my mind. I just wanted my strawberry chair back. When everything was packed and we were ready for our journey, Abba gathered the family and said, "Let's pray." I raised my cupped hands to waist level, copying Ami and Abba. We all prayed silently, asking Allah for a safe and swift journey. When we finally arrived at Abba's new duty station, we were in Dunoon, Scotland. Looking back, I still feel like Dunoon was my first real home. It wasn't that I built any friendships at school or that I knew many boys in the neighborhood. Even the strawberry chair went missing in the move. It was that I grew closer with my family and deeper in my faith during those years. I had my Ami, Abba, and Baji. I did not need anything besides them. Chapter 4. The Perfect Book. By the time I arrived in Scotland, I had not yet learned English well. We always spoke Urdu at home, and if we were going to learn any script, it would be Arabic. The reason for this was simple. The Quran was written in Arabic, and it was imperative that Baji and I learn to recite it. Muslims believe that every single word of the Quran was dictated verbatim by Allah through the Archangel Gabriel to Muhammad. The Quran is therefore not only inspired at the level of meaning, but at the deeper level of the words themselves. For this reason, Muslims do not consider the Quran translatable. If it is rendered in any language other than Arabic, it is not Quran, but rather an interpretation of the Quran. A book can be true Quran only if written in Arabic. This is why it is such an important belief for Muslims that the Quran has always been exactly the same, word for word, dot for dot. Imams and teachers regularly declare that the Quran was perfectly preserved, unchanged from the moment Muhammad heard it from Gabriel and dictated it to his scribes. Of course, Muhammad had nothing to do with composing the Quran. He was simply the conduit of its revelation to mankind, and he dutifully preserved its exact form. Had he not, and had the words been even slightly altered, the Quran would be irretrievably lost. But such a tainting of the words was unfathomable. No one doubted the perfect transmission of the Quran. The words must be perfect. In fact, the emphasis on the words themselves leads many Muslims to neglect the meaning of those words. Muslims who recite the Quran regularly are regarded as pious, whereas Muslims who only contemplate the meaning of the Quran are regarded as learned. Piety is the greater honor, and most Muslims I knew growing up could recite many chapters of the Quran from memory, but rarely could they explain the meaning or context of those verses. Ami had it in mind to teach us both the recitation of the Quran and the translations, but recitation was first. Every day, as far back as I can remember, Ami would put a traditional Muslim skull cap on my head, sit me down beside her, and teach me to read Arabic. We began with a book called Al-Qaeda, the Guide. It taught us Arabic letters in their various forms with their respective sounds. Right after moving to Scotland, I graduated from the Qaeda to the Quran. I remember that moment vividly because my momentary elation was curtailed by horror. After finishing the last page of the Qaeda, Ami reached next to her, picked up a Quran, and presented it to me. It was my Quran, the very first book I was ever given. Thrilled, I ran to Baji to show it to her. Baji was playing on the floor near Ami and Abba's room, so I got down next to her and placed the Quran on the ground to show it to her. All of a sudden, I heard Ami emit a heart-stopping scream while running in my direction. "Nabeel!" I was too shocked to respond. I had never heard her scream like that, nor had I ever seen her run. In a flash, she picked up the Quran. "Never put the Quran on the ground." "Okay." "Always raise it high. Put it in the most honored place. Wash your hands before touching it, and only touch it with your right hand. This is not just any book. It is the word of Allah. Treat it with the respect he deserves." "Okay." "Jao, go." She was deeply disturbed, and I did not hesitate to leave. From then on, whenever I carried the Quran, I raised it high. Baji also learned from my mistake, so the next time Ami called us to read the Quran together, we came holding our Quran as high above our heads as we could, arms fully outstretched. Ami was smiling. This was not exactly what she meant, but she was pleased. Baji was the elder, so she went first. Ami pointed to each word Baji was to read, slowly moving her finger across the page from right to left. Baji was not so much reading the words as singing them. We were taught to read the Quran melodically, making the sound of the recitation as beautiful as possible. Some men dedicate their lives to this practice, perfecting their pitch, tempo, pronunciation, and melody. But Baji and I were no experts. She had a few years' head start on me, but she had only just learned to recite the Quran acceptably. When she finished, it was my turn. I had never read the Quran before, and I was terribly excited. "Bilu, what do we recite before we start anything?" "Bismillahir-Rahman-ar-Rahim." "And what does that mean?" "In the name of God, the most gracious, most merciful." "Why do we recite this prayer?" "So that we remember everything belongs to Allah, and so that we do only good things." "Shabash, good job. Do you know where this prayer comes from?" "No." "It is found at the beginning of every surah in the Quran." "Every surah?" "Every surah except one." "Why did Allah leave it out of one surah, Ami?" Allah was very upset with people in that surah, Beta, so he didn't give us the blessing of the Bismillah there. But he loves us very much, so he put an extra one into another surah. And how many surahs are there? 114. Shabash. And you will read them all soon, inshallah. Baji finished the Quran when she turned 7, and I want you to do it by the time you are 6. Let's go. As the days progressed, I became increasingly familiar with the Quran. I learned that there were 2 ways the Quran was divided. One was into 114 chapters, and the other was into 30 parts. The latter is a system that Muslims devised long after the Quran was compiled, mainly so that the entire Quran could be easily recited during the 30 days of Ramadan. But the 30 parts were important to me for another reason. Whenever I finished one, Ami bought me a congratulatory gift. The Mario Brothers trash can was my favorite. By the time I reached an acceptable pace, Ami and I had developed a rhythm. We would sit down with my Quran, open it to the last page we had read, and Ami would point to my ending spot for that day. For some reason, I preferred to recite exactly 18 verses. If Ami picked more for the day, I would complain. And if she picked less, I would consider reading a few extra to make her happy. And so the days went on. I ultimately finished the Quran just before I turned 6, much to Ami's delight. Concurrently, Ami had helped me memorize the last 7 surahs to recite during the daily prayers. My favorite was Surat al-Ikhlas, number 112, because it was short, melodic, and memorable. Plus, it was the first surah I memorized, and I repeated it many times a day during Salat. It was one of Ami's favorite chapters as well, but for a different reason. In a hadith, Muhammad told his companions that Surat al-Ikhlas is so weighty and consequential that reciting it is like reciting 1/3 of the whole Quran in one sitting. What was the message that Muhammad considered so important? Essentially this: God is not a father, and he has no son. For much more detail on the Muslim view of the Quran, read Part 4 of No God But One, titled The Quran or the Bible, 2 Different Scriptures. Chapter 5. Stories of the Prophet. We're late, let's go. It was a Saturday morning, and Abba was standing by the door waiting for us. Every Saturday, our family would travel from Dunoon into Glasgow to the Jamaat Masjid. It was our favorite time of the week when we would get to spend time with other Muslims, almost all of them of Pakistan heritage. They were all just as out of place as we were, so we fit together perfectly. Ami seemed to live for that day of the week, since it was the only place she really let her hair down outside of the home. Figuratively, of course, but also literally. Muslim women take off their burqas in each other's company, and they are usually quite fashion conscious at such times. As much as Ami looked forward to it, she was always running late. Always. In Pakistani culture, punctuality is not nearly as important as it is to Westerners. Social considerations take priority. It's often seen as uptight to be punctual, and to show up to someone's home at an invited time is actually considered somewhat rude. What if they're making last-minute preparations for your arrival? It would impugn their hospitality to arrive before they are ready. 15 or 30 minutes late is a safe bet. Abba, on the other hand, had left this aspect of our culture at boot camp. He was now a military man, and our tardiness perturbed him. Try as he might, he was never able to change Ami's ways. She always did whatever she wanted, and Abba always reminded her that he was the man of the house. She would listen for a few minutes, and then slowly charm her way into his heart, bringing him back into a good mood. That lover's tiff might as well have been on the calendar every Saturday morning. But this particular Saturday came only once a year. It was the day our Jamaat celebrated Sirat an-Nabi, the life of the Prophet. It wasn't Muhammad's birthday, just a day that the community chose to gather and tell stories about Muhammad's life. Muslims consider Muhammad's life exemplary, and devout Muslims emulate him as much as possible. To do so, Muslims learn stories about his life from books of Sirah and Hadith. They are almost never read the stories themselves, rather they hear them in sermons at the mosque. It is prestigious to be well learned in the Hadith, able to quote and recite them in their appropriate contexts. Thus, going to the mosque was important for both religious and social reasons. But we were late. Hello, come on. The mornings were virtually scripted for Ami, Baji, and me. After waking up and reciting the morning prayers, Ami dressed me and Baji, fed us, and then put on her makeup. She would shout, "I'm ready," right after the foundation and right before the lipstick. This Saturday she brought the lipstick with her into the car. Soon we were on our way to Glasgow. To get to Glasgow from Dunoon, we had to cross Holy Loch. The loch was a berth for American nuclear submarines during the Cold War. Abba was the safety and environmental officer for the submarine repair ship. Of course, I did not know that at the time. All I knew was that there were 2 ferries that took us across the loch, a small red one and a big black one, and the black one had a lounge where we could get cheese sandwiches. Usually Ami and Abba had stopped squabbling by the time we got on the ferry, and on this day they decided to stay in the car and prepare us for Sirat an-Nabi Day. Ami quizzed us, and either Baji or I responded, depending on who knew the answer. "Batao, tell me, when was Muhammad born and where?" AD 570 in Mecca. "Shabash, good job." "Batao, now tell me, who was his father?" "His name was Abdullah, but he died before Muhammad was born." "And his mother?" "Her name was Amina, and she died when he was 6. "So who took care of Muhammad when she died?" "His grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, but only for 2 years. Then he died." "And after that?" "His uncle, Abu Talib. He lived until Muhammad was much older." These were routine questions, all part of a proper Islamic education for young Muslims. Parents often pride themselves in their children's rote knowledge of Islamic facts and recitations, and Ami and Abba were no exception. "Okay, this one is difficult. Tell me one thing that happened to Muhammad before his mother died." Baji answered. "One day, when Muhammad was playing with some of the other kids, 2 angels came to him and opened up his chest. The other kids were scared and thought the angels might be jinn. They ran away. The angels took out Muhammad's heart and cleaned it until it shined. Then they put it back into his chest and left." "Shabash, Guriya." That was Ami's nickname for Baji, which means doll. "Since you answered that, Nabeel, Batao, who was Muhammad's first wife and how did they get married?" This one was easy. Muhammad's first wife was Khadijah. She was a rich widow, and Muhammad worked for her as a merchant. When she saw how good he was at business and how honest he was with money, she offered to marry him. "And how old were they?" "Muhammad was 25 and Khadijah was 40. "Good, but maybe that wasn't difficult enough. Batao, Bilu, how did Muhammad find out he was a prophet?" "He was praying in a cave one day." Abba interjected. "What was the name of the cave?" "The cave of Hira. He was praying, and an angel came to him and asked him to recite. But Muhammad did not know how to recite, so the angel had to ask him 3 times. Then the angel gave Muhammad the first verse of the Quran." "Shabash," Ami continued. "And what surah was that?" Neither Baji nor I knew the answer to this question. It was harder than it might appear, since the Quran is not in chronological order. It wasn't a separate question in the books we had read, so we hadn't paid specific attention to it. "No problem. Don't worry. In case anyone asks you today, remember that it is Surat al-Alaq." "Ja'ani, no one is going to ask them what surah it was. Ask them the important questions." Ja'an or Ja'ani is a Urdu term of endearment that means my life. It is used for loved ones, and the way Abba used it here, it roughly meant my darling. But Ami wasn't having any of it. "So the name of a surah isn't important, but the name of a cave is? Okay, fine. Let the man of the house ask questions. Khalo, Batao, who was the first person to accept Muhammad as a prophet?" "His wife Khadijah." "And among men?" "His best friend, Abu Bakr." "And what is special about Abu Bakr?" "He became the first Khalifa when Muhammad died." This was an important issue about which Shia disagree, but Baji and I did not know that yet. "Good. Who accepted Islam first among children?" "Muhammad's cousin Ali." "And what is special about Ali?" "He became the 4th Khalifa." "How did most of the other Meccans receive Islam?" "They persecuted the Muslims, insulting them and attacking them for years." "So what happened?" "Muhammad had to flee to Medina." Abba grew silent. Waves lapped softly at the ferry's hull as it began to dock. Juxtaposed with the rapid-fire questions, the brief pause served to magnify the mood. What was Abba thinking about? When he finally spoke, his voice was contemplative, almost remorseful. Bilal, Batao, what was the first battle Muhammad had to fight? Give me details. It was the Battle of Badr. The Meccans came to Medina to attack the Muslims and destroy them. They brought 1,000 soldiers and many horses. The Muslims had only 313 men, very little armor, and only a few horses. Who won? We did, of course. Why? Because we're better. No, Beta. They had the upper hand in every way. We won because Allah helped us. If this battle had gone naturally, we would have lost, and Muhammad would have been killed. Audu Billah. God will always help the Muslims because we are his people. Okay, Beti, now you tell me, what were the other battles that were fought at Medina? The Battle of Uhud and the Battle of the Trench, Baji responded, perhaps too cheerfully for the subject matter. Why did the Muslims fight these battles? Were we attacking anyone? No, Abba. Muslims only fight to defend themselves. The Meccans were attacking the Muslims. So what did the Muslims have to do to stop the Meccans? They conquered Mecca. And where was this prophesied? I interjected. In the Bible, Deuteronomy. There was a whole field of Islamic polemics called Muhammad and the Bible, and our books of Islam knowledge were full of references to biblical prophecies about Muhammad. I was fascinated with them. Plus, I loved saying Deuteronomy, though I had no idea what it was. Okay, last question. When Muhammad conquered Mecca, what did he do? He forgave all the Meccans. Yes, Abba trailed off again, and this time I could tell he was preparing to make an impassioned point. Sometimes his love for Islam overwhelmed him, and he would even pontificate to the wind if no one was there to listen. It did not happen often, but when it did, I loved it. I soaked it in. Yes, he forgave everyone. These are the same people who killed Muhammad's uncle, who are responsible for the death of Khadijah, who persecuted Muslims for years and then launched many wars against the defenseless community. When Muhammad finally had a chance to strike them down, no less than they deserved, he gave mercy to them. Is it any wonder Muhammad is called Rahmatullah, the mercy of Allah? Abba's eyes were fixed on the horizon. We hung on his every word, brimming with respect and pride for our prophet. Many of the Meccans saw Muhammad's mercy that day and couldn't help but proclaim the beauty of Islam. The whole of Arabia was so in awe of Muhammad that they all became Muslim. The messenger and message were irresistible, and soon the Muslim empire expanded from Spain to India. It was the greatest civilization the world had ever seen. While the West was in its dark ages, Islam was in its golden era. Western society owes much to Islam. Science, medicine, mathematics, philosophy. Muslims had a huge impact in all these fields. That's why we still find Arabic words in all of them, like algebra and alchemy. Unfortunately, when the Western civilizations conquered, they destroyed everything. Muslim scholars were murdered, libraries were burned, cities were razed. The Spanish Inquisition is just one example of how Christians treated Muslims. But why would the Christians treat Muslims that way, I wondered aloud. Didn't they follow Hazrat Isa? Beta, they weren't following Hazrat Isa. They stopped following him a long time before. They turned Jesus into a god, and so they dishonored Hazrat Isa and blasphemed Allah. That is why Allah sent Muhammad and Islam as the final message for all of mankind. It embodies all the messages that Allah sent through the prophets. Adam, Noah, Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Moses, David, Elijah. All of them brought messages from Allah to their people, and although the people accepted their messages at first, later generations corrupted them all. Light gets dimmed the farther it gets from its source. That is why we cannot trust the Bible today. It is corrupted. Only the Quran is perfect. Only Islam is incorruptible. Allah will guard it until the message spreads and the world becomes Muslim. That is when the day of judgment will come. That is the day Islam will be victorious. We were all entranced by Abba's love for the faith, embracing his vision for a global Islamic future. There was nothing violent about its victory. It was a romantic notion of vindication and destiny. After processing for a few moments, Ami brought us back to earth. Khalo, that's enough. We are going to arrive at the masjid in a few minutes. Let's get ready. and she was right. We were nearing the mosque. Time had felt suspended, and I hadn't even noticed getting off the ferry. I loved discussing matters of religion. The Quran, Allah, Muhammad, dates, names, places, they all enthralled me. Even talking about Jesus and the Bible was fascinating. To me, it was all a part of Allah's plan for mankind, a plan that was finally enacted through the greatest man who ever lived, Muhammad. He had our hearts, and he had our allegiance. For much more detail on the Muslim view of Muhammad, read Part 3 of No God But One, titled Muhammad or Jesus, Two Different Founders. Chapter 6. Righteous Through Ritual Prayer. The Glasgow Mosque was one of my favorite places in childhood. It sat at an oddly angled intersection near the River Clyde, just off the main road. Made of red stone and capped with a green dome, it had many floors with irregularly placed staircases, doors, and hallways. It was the perfect place to play hide and seek with the other Muslim boys. Apart from children's games, there were many congregational activities at the mosque. We came together for holy days, celebrations, funerals, weddings, picnics, parties, and pretty much anything we wanted to do as a community. The mosque is a very dear place to Muslims, especially expatriated Muslims who long for fellowship. But none of these are the primary purpose of a mosque. The primary purpose is congregational prayer, salat. These are the obligatory prayer rituals offered 5 times daily by all Muslims. First standing, then bowing, then briefly prostrating with their foreheads to the ground before rising and sitting on their heels. Muslims recite prescribed Arabic supplications to Allah. Each of the 5 daily prayers has its own name: Fajr, Zuhr, Asr, Maghrib, and Isha. Although the words and postures are the same for all, the number of repetitions differs. Each repetition is called a rakat. A Muslim is required to pray 17 rakat daily, and optional prayers can be offered alongside these. In our Jamaat, all told, we were taught to pray 31 rakat per day, whenever possible. The prayer times often become a schedule of sorts for Muslims, waking up with the adhan for Fajr, taking a late morning break from work for Zuhr, going home after Asr, having dinner after Maghrib, and preparing for sleep after Isha. For each of these prayers, after hearing the adhan, Muslims perform an ablution called wudu, a ceremonial washing of the arms, face, and feet. Often they recite memorized du'as while performing the wudu. Then they hurry to the congregation to pray. Muslims all around the world pray roughly the same way. In fact, they all face the same point toward the Kaaba, the Muslim holy shrine in Mecca, which looks like a black cube. It is Islamic lore that Abraham built the Kaaba with his son Ishmael, and when Muhammad took refuge in Medina, he commanded Muslims to start facing the Kaaba during Salat. They have done so ever since, whether standing in a circle in the Grand Mosque, which houses the Kaaba, or in a line halfway around the world. In the West, you might see a zealous Muslim pull out a compass at prayer time to find the exact direction. I have even seen prayer rugs with compasses built into them. The prayer is led by one man called the Imam. Men and women pray separately but in sufficient proximity so that the women can hear the Imam's voice as he leads the prayer. While the Imam leads, some portions of the prayer are recited silently and individually, and other portions he prays aloud. Sections of each prayer involve the recitation of the Quran, and the Imam always recites these aloud from memory. The process of reciting the Quran during prayer was an ingenious method to propagate the Quran in the mostly illiterate society of 7th century Arabia, and it still works today. That is why the only criteria for an imam is that he knows the Quran well and is able to adeptly recite large portions of it. Every once in a while, an imam might make a mistake in recitation, and it is the duty of the Muslims in the front row to correct him. Thus, a hierarchy of piety is often found in the rows of salat, with elder, respected Muslims toward the front. With that minor exception, Muslims take pride in the equality found in salat. From rich men to poor men, statesmen to workmen, all men line up side by side and pray as one. It is a solemn event, where no one speaks, no one crosses in front of those praying, and no one interrupts. No one except, of course, a 5-year-old brat from America. A few times, while running around the worshippers during Salat, someone would give me a swift spank to jar me out of my mischief. My parents were fine with this. It took a mosque to raise a Muslim child, and the members of our Jamaat trusted one another deeply. On one occasion during the Salat, I was restless and fidgety. Out of nowhere, I felt a swift spank on my behind. I turned around to see who it was, but there was no one behind me. I surmised it was my uncle, who was standing next to me, so after finishing the Salat, I tearfully accused him of the spanking. Without flinching, he pointed up to the sky and said, "No, it was Allah." My eyes went wide, and I thought, if only I had turned around faster, I would have seen the hand of Allah. 20 years later, he confessed it was him. But in the meantime, I was honored to have been spanked by God himself. I always stood with due solemnity in Salat after that. Since the postures and words are memorized, there is nothing extemporaneous, indeed nothing personal, about Salat. For the vast majority of Muslims, it is simply an act of duty, not personal or heartfelt expression. True, one can dwell on the meaning of the words that he is reciting, and by doing so makes it more personal, but rare is the worshipper who can do that for each of the 17 required rak'at every single day. Even then, the words are exogenous to the worshippers, not the least because they are in a foreign language. This is true even for Arabic speakers. Arabs speak colloquial forms of Arabic that vary by region. If they want to learn a form of Arabic that approximates classical Arabic, they have to learn it at school. The language of the daily prayers is not personal to anyone. This may lead one to wonder why Muslims continue to pray 5 times a day. What is the point in reciting the same words 5 times a day, every day, when they don't mean anything personally? I wondered that myself when I was young, and when I asked Abba, he said, "Nabeel, before Allah, we are all dirty, and we need His cleansing. Now imagine you bathed 5 times a day. How clean would you be?" The Salat is the spiritual bath that Allah has given Muslims to keep us pure and clean. That is why we pray 5 times a day. There is some variation in the prayers. On Fridays, the Islamic Sabbath day, the Imam gives a sermon and Muslims pray a modified form of the Zuhr prayer called Jummah prayer. The word Jummah means congregated, and it can be prayed only with 3 people or more. So important is Jummah prayer that the word Friday in Arabic and Urdu is named after it. Ami and Abba told us that if we missed 3 Jummah prayers in a row, we would have a black scar on our heart that could never be cleansed. Unfortunately, we could not go to the mosque on Fridays because of its distance from our home and because of Abba's schedule. Of course, we could also not go to the mosque for the 5 daily prayers either. So we usually prayed the daily Salat and Jummah as a family at home. If ever Abba was deployed and there was no male relative staying at our home, I would lead Ami and Baji in prayer. That started at a young age when Ami felt I was mature enough. Although I enjoyed leading prayer, and although some of the imams in our Jamaat had melodious voices or commanding presences, Abba was always my favorite imam. His tempo, his voice, his melody, and his position in front of the rest of our family just seemed right to me. Even now, I can hear his voice reciting long portions of the Quran if I just close my eyes. That is why I know these portions, because I heard Abba repeat them so often. Salat solidified my father as my spiritual leader, and indelibly chiseled the Quran into my heart. This is the power of Salat. Chapter 7. Diversity in Islam. The year 1989 was important for our Jamaat. It was the 100th anniversary of the Ahmadiyya sect of Islam. our sect, and people from all over the world were gathering in England to celebrate the centenary. Our family considered it Allah's special blessing that this momentous event occurred while we were stationed in the United Kingdom. We would be among tens of thousands of people in attendance. The celebration was held in the English countryside at Tilford, where massive marquees served as meeting halls and trodden grass as paths. There were tents for praying, serving food, broadcasting by satellite, and selling memorabilia. Diplomats and other honored guests had been invited from all across the world to attend the sessions, and many came bearing messages of tolerance and multiculturalism. The female diplomats were the only women allowed in the men's area. The women's area duplicated almost all the men's venues, but the two were separated. I was still young enough that I could get into the women's section without raising any eyebrows, and I often did. It was far livelier than the men's area. The women wore colorful clothing, laughed loudly, and talked incessantly, completely ignoring the speeches being televised from the men's section. There the atmosphere was always solemn, and as a 6-year-old, solemn meant boring. During one of the main sessions, I intended to go from the women's meeting hall to the men's bazaar, where they were selling specially designed centenary badges. On my way over, an elderly man firmly grabbed my shoulder as I tried to pass by him. That was never a good sign. He physically turned me around, placed his hand between my shoulder blades, and guided me to the men's main hall. He sat me down, very close to the front and too close to himself. He did all this without saying a word, but he gave me a very stern look that said all he needed to say. Sit down and listen to the speech. To this day, I have no idea who he was, but I knew better than to disobey an elder at a Jamaat gathering, so I turned my attention to the speaker. The badge had to wait. The speaker was a missionary from Pakistan, whose accent made him exceedingly difficult to understand. His native tongue was Punjabi, a language related to Urdu and spoken in rural Pakistani villages. He was importing his Punjabi accent and inflections unabated into the English language. The result was not pleasant. Fortunately, his message was a staple of high-profile gatherings in our Jamaat that I had heard many times before. He was defending the fact that we were Muslims. The other Muslims say we are not Muslim, but who are they to cast us out of Islam? According to Anas ibn Malik, Muhammad said, anyone who proclaims the Shahada is Muslim. And the Shahada is clear. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Even today, all you have to do is recite the Shahada, and you will be accepted into the fold of Islam. He seemed to say this directly to the diplomats, who shifted in their seats. Every person must recite the Shahada to become a Muslim, and that is all he must do to be Muslim, according to this beautiful hadith of our beloved Prophet Muhammad. The missionary was becoming more and more animated by the moment. Years later, I found out that he had seen his loved ones suffer terrible persecution at the hands of other Muslims. Some members of his congregation had even been killed. His rhetoric was cathartic, fire expelled directly from his heart. Neglecting the Shahada makes you non-Muslim. Reciting the Shahada makes you Muslim. And we recite the Shahada. That's it. We are Muslim. But why do I bother to clarify this, as if we are teetering on the border of Islam? Do we reject any of our Islamic obligations? No. In rapid-fire fashion, the missionary enumerated the fundamental practices required to all Muslims, the 5 pillars of Islam. We recite the Shahada. We pray the Salat. We pay zakat to the poor. We fast during Ramadan. And we make pilgrimage to the Kaaba to perform Hajj. These are the things we are commanded to do by Allah in the Quran, and we do all of them. Who can deny we are Muslim? And we explain this to them with clear proofs from the Quran and Hadith, but they want to find a way against us, so they change their objections. They say to us, you pretend to be Muslims with your actions, but you do not believe what Muhammad taught. Tell me, what did he teach that we do not believe? The missionary transitioned from the fundamental practices to the fundamental beliefs, called the 6 Articles of Faith. We believe in the one God Allah. We believe in the unseen spiritual beings. We believe that Allah sent prophets into this world. We believe that He gave sacred scriptures to His prophets. We believe that there will be a day of judgment. And we believe that Allah's decree is sovereign over the universe. What don't we believe? What we don't believe is falsehood. We don't believe, like the Shia do, that Allah made a mistake by allowing Abu Bakr to become Khalifa. We don't believe, like the Sunnis do, that we can murder people in the name of Allah, let alone murder other Muslims. These are egregious beliefs, and were we to believe them, our ejection from Islam would be justified. Ahmadi missionaries were not known for cautious treatment of sensitive matters in moments of passion. His word choice was provocative, but there was some truth in it. He was referring to the main division among Muslims, the division between Shia and Sunni. There are three major branches of Shia Islam, and together the Shia make the approximately 10 to 15% of the world's Muslims. They believe that authority in early Islam passed through Muhammad's bloodline, so that when Muhammad died, his male next of kin ought to have borne the mantle of Islam leadership. That would have been Ali. However, when Muhammad died, there was no appointed successor. The Muslims elected Abu Bakr as the first Khalifa. For the most part, those that recognize Abu Bakr's caliphate follow one of the four schools of Sunni Islam, and they make up about 80% of the world's Muslims. The remaining 5 to 10% are those who fit comfortably in neither category. That's where we stood. Muhammad proclaimed that if we recite the Shahada, we are Muslim. We do that. The Quran tells us we must perform the 5 pillars. We do that. Islam teaches us that we must believe the 6 articles of faith. We do that. So why do they call us kafir? They have the audacity to call us kafir because we do not interpret 2 words in the Quran the way they do. 2 words. Khatam an-Nabiyyin, the seal of the prophets. In the minds of these violent and uneducated Muslims, disagreements over these words justifies murdering their brothers in Islam. Astaghfirullah. The Imam was referring to the controversial claim made by the founder of our sect, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad, that he was a subordinate prophet under Muhammad. Most Muslims argue that 3340 precludes any prophethood after Muhammad, thereby making Mirza Ghulam Ahmad a false prophet and his followers non-Muslim. Because of this, hundreds, if not thousands, of Ahmadi Muslims have been murdered in countries like Pakistan and Indonesia at the hands of Orthodox Muslims. They have taken the religion of peace and turned it into a religion of bloodshed and violence. But inshallah, God will restore Islam through Ahmadiyat. He has already sent the Imam of our time, the promised Messiah, and his successors are divinely appointed Caliphs. Here was even more offense in Ahmad's claims. After claiming to be a prophet and running into the Khatam an-Nabiyyin argument, Ahmad partially defended himself by saying he was no new prophet at all. He argued that people of many faiths are waiting for the prophets to come back. Jews are waiting for Elijah, Hindus are waiting for Krishna, Buddhists are waiting for Buddha, and Christians are waiting for Jesus. Ahmad claimed to be all these figures wrapped up in one. To top it off, his successors claimed to have established a new caliphate, a claim that is very offensive to the Muslims around the world who are still waiting for a final caliphate. Who can outwit Allah? He is the best of planners, and he will revitalize the world through Islam and Ahmadiyat. This inevitably not even Satan can alter. When the missionary said this, sporadic yells were emitted from the congregation, all calling the same proclamation, Takbir! The thousands of men gathered in the tent responded in one accord, Allahu Akbar! The strongest voice won out and boomed again, Takbir! With emboldened passion, the entire host of men erupted, Allahu Akbar! Ahmadis tend not to clap in agreement, instead marshalling one another to praise Allah and invoke His blessings. The man who had yelled Takbir continued to rally the gathered Muslims, bellowing Islam, which was received by Zimbadad. Long may it live. Islam, Zimbadad. Ahmadiyat, Zimbadad. Time seemed to hang in the air as the unknown voice thundered call after call, leading an army of Muslims in praising Allah. That the army was made up of pacifist Muslims would do nothing to allay the trepidations of an uninitiated observer. The roar of thousands was heart-stopping. With nothing further to add, the missionary thanked the assembly and concluded the speech. Considering it today, I realize that the issue of orthodoxy and heresy is multifaceted and complicated. It is true that many Muslims call each other non-Muslims at the slightest provocation. The label of infidel is all too readily doled out over minor disagreements. I doubt whether any of the dozens of sects in Islam have ever escaped the accusation of heresy. That said, the founder of Ahmadiyat made some very bold claims offensive to many parties. Claiming to be the second coming of Jesus offends both Christians and Muslims. Demanding the veneration due to a prophet is no small claim for Muslims, and it is not difficult to see why some of the Orthodox consider Ahmadiyat a cult. But to me, many things weigh in favor of Ahmadis being Muslims. As the missionary said, Ahmadis adhere to the central doctrines and practices of Islam. Based on their daily lives and applied beliefs, Ahmadis are virtually indistinguishable from Sunnis. Along a similar vein, when I was an Ahmadi, I saw myself tied to Islam far more than Ahmadiyat. But perhaps most importantly, Muhammad himself would consider Ahmadis Muslim. Do not excommunicate anyone who declares that there is no God but Allah. The lesson to be learned is that there is much division in Islam. The best determination of whether a man is Muslim is if he exclusively declares that Allah is God and Muhammad is Allah's messenger. Beyond this point, there is great diversity in Islam. Chapter 8. The Path of Sharia. When it comes to Sharia, the diversity in Islam can lead to widely disparate views. Sharia is not a field that the average Muslim knows well. When I first heard the term, I was at an ijtema, a tournament that our Jamaat held once a year. The tournament events were both religious and physical in nature. The religious competitions included Quran memorization, Quran recitation, Adhan performance, Islamic poetry recitation, speech competitions, hadith memorization, and general religious knowledge tests. I'm not too sure what the physical competitions included, because Ami had me tied up with religious ones, especially the speech competition. Ami was very thorough in preparing me for my speech. Not only did she write the whole script, she trained me to deliver it. During the nights before the competition, after Isha Salat, Ami would have me stand up and do practice runs. She stood behind me while I was speaking and moved my arms and hands at the appropriate times to make emphatic gestures as if I were her marionette. She directed me where to pause for dramatic effect, when to turn my head, and how to raise my tempo and volume for maximum impact. I found out later that she had been the captain of her debate team in Pakistan, which explained the course of her conversations with Abba. On the day of the Ijtema, I competed in the 6 to 8-year-old bracket. The topic of my speech was, "Always tell the truth, no matter what the consequences may be." I won an award for my speech, along with a few other awards. Ami and Abba also competed, but the adult competitions always seemed much more light-hearted than the youth sessions. The tournament as a whole seemed centered on propagating Islam to the younger generation. To this end, the adult events were staggered and finished after the youth competitions so that the young participants could be in attendance. I decided to sit in on the men's extemporaneous speech competition. The prompts in this competition tested a wide array of topics such as outline the history of Ahmadi Jamaat, what must we do to raise our children in the Islamic way, and how do we know Jesus is not the Son of God? A man that I called Uncle Faison, a fluent English speaker in his early 40s, drew the prompt, explained Sharia, including its sources and application. He stood up and began his speech by greeting the audience with a formal salutation. Respected Imam, revered elders, honored guests, and dear brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. The room responded in unison, Wa alaikum salam. Glancing down at his prompt, Uncle Faison began. The topic I have been given today is Sharia. Sharia is Islamic law. The word Sharia means the path, as in the correct path we must walk according to Allah's will. The elders who were judging the event looked impressed. For non-Arab Muslims, being able to accurately define Arabic terms was always worth bonus points, tournament or not. Emboldened by their reaction, he continued, "There is no book of Sharia. We must derive the law from the hierarchy of sources using a process of jurisprudence called fiqh. The first and greatest source is the Quran. Nothing can supersede the Quran because it is the word of Allah. But the Quran is not comprehensive. As Muslims, there is much we must do and believe that is not found in the Quran. For this we go to the second source, hadith." Some of us in the crowd were taken aback by the blunt comment that the Quran was insufficient. Though technically true, it ought not to have been stated so crudely. It sounded almost shameful, as if the Quran were somehow less than it should be. But Uncle Faison's eyes were set on the elders, who did not display any reaction, so he proceeded. The Hadith elaborate and clarify what is found in the Quran, but they never contradict. There is no contradiction in Islam. If a Hadith is found in any way to contradict the Quran, then it is inauthentic and must be disregarded. If no Hadith can be found to clarify an issue, then we must turn to the third source of Sharia, the ulema, Muslim scholars who are wise and experienced in Islam. Uncle Faison smiled courteously at the Imam, on whom the flattery was not lost. This is where Sharia comes from. But where can we see it? We see it everywhere in a devout Muslim's life. It is how we pray, when to fast, whom to marry, what foods to avoid. All these basic matters are issues of Sharia. There are also far more detailed matters, like whether we must pay zakat on appreciated home values. The elders chuckled and gave Uncle Faison the signal to wrap up. This is a brief explanation of Sharia, its sources, and its application. Shukriya, thank you. With that, he sat back down on the ground as the elders nodded their approval. As I would come to know later, it was a solid answer to the question, at least from an Ahmadi perspective. Ahmadis have very little choice in their authority structure, and so the Jama'at leaders have full say in interpreting Sharia for them. What the leaders say goes. This is not the case for most Muslims. Other Muslims have options. For example, if a Sunni woman wants to obtain a divorce from her husband, she has to receive approval from an authority. This must be from a mufti, someone trained in at least the basics of Sharia. If she were to present her case before a mufti, she would provide her with his decision, called a fatwa. Fatwas are non-binding, though, and if she were to dislike it, she could decide to go to another mufti and see if he provides a more favorable fatwa. Muftis from different schools of thought have different precedents and therefore provide different fatwas. For example, some schools of Sunni thought insist on a woman's consent before she is given in marriage. Other schools do not, requiring that the woman abide by her family's wishes. Since no one is bound to any specific school, some women choose schools of thought based on the fatwa they prefer. Even though this practice of fatwa shopping is discouraged by Sunni scholars, it serves as a perfect example of the kind of thing Ahmadis cannot do because of their very strict authority structure. There is another dimension to the complexity. Each denomination differs on what hadith they consider accurate. Since the hadith are the second rung of Sharia, these differences of opinion have real consequences. Many of the differences between the ways Sunnis and Shias practice Islam are over this very matter. Their books of hadith are disparate. This difference, combined with the Shia position regarding the authority of imams, results in a significantly different view of Sharia. Differences aside, it is worth noting that a great deal of overlap exists between the majorities of Muslims. For example, all 4 major schools of Sunni thought and all 3 major schools of Shia thought teach that people who leave Islam must be killed for their apostasy, disagreeing only on the details of qualifying circumstances and implementation. Only outlying groups, such as liberal Muslims and Ahmadis, disagree with this time-honored practice. I did not learn all of these details at the Ijma, nor did I need to. In fact, most Muslims do not know these things. They know Islam to the extent that they practice it, and these are matters for the learned. More than anything else, the Ijtema and other gatherings like it caused us to grow deeper in love with Islam and deeper in community with one another. They reassured us that we had religious leaders who had answers that we might not have. By meeting together regularly and discussing matters of our faith, we became a strong community. For much more detail on Sharia, read Part 1 of No God But One, titled Sharia or the Gospel, Two Different Solutions. Chapter 9, Dreams of the Faithful. Chapter 9, Dreams of the Faithful. It was after a similar gathering one night, when we were driving back from Glasgow to Dunoon, that Ami and Abba were obviously worried about something. Our family had lost track of time, and the ferries over Holy Loch had stopped running for the night. To make it back home, we had to drive around the loch, which took no less than 2.5 hours. But that had happened a few times in the past, and Ami and Abba had never been worried before. The next day was a Sunday, so Abba wasn't concerned about missing work. They were sitting in the front seats, not speaking loudly enough for us to hear in the back, but Baji and I could tell that their speech was pressured, and a shadow of concern was growing between them. Something was amiss. Baji spoke first. "Abba, what's wrong?" "Nothing, Beti. Check your seatbelt, make sure the door is locked, and go back to sleep. It's past your bedtime. We'll be home soon, inshallah." Ami turned a distraught glance toward Abba. They said nothing. After a moment, I prodded them again. "What's going on, Ami?" "Did you hear Abba? Do what he says." Whatever it was, Ami and Abba were not about to share it with us, and there was no way we could fall asleep now. But we didn't want to get in trouble either, so Baji and I pretended to be asleep. After a few more tense minutes, Ami had made up her mind about something. She turned to Abba and said, "Does it still look the same to you?" "Yes, it looks the same. Actually, it looks even more like it." "Then let's turn around. Let's go back. Khalo, this is enough." This seemed to be all the prodding Abba needed. He turned the car around and started heading back to Glasgow. Still, Baji and I knew not to ask any questions. The tension was fading, but the mood hadn't improved. "Should I find a hotel?" Abba asked. "No, we can stay at the Malik's home. They will understand." If Ami could have said one more thing to instantly transform my fear into joy, that was it. The Maliks were the one family from the Masjid that we were especially close to. I called Mr. and Mrs. Malik uncle and auntie, not just because that is standard terminology in Pakistani culture for elders, but also because they were like a second set of parents to me. Whether I was carrying myself with the utmost propriety or plumbing the depths of my mischief, they received me with warmth and love. Uncle and auntie had 5 children who were our good friends. The oldest son in their family was 13, and he was my childhood role model. I was thrilled at the prospect of spending time with him. For the time being, the unnatural ride home was forgotten. What made this turn of events even more exciting was that this would be my first time spending the night at a friend's house. Unless we were traveling or visiting family, we rarely spent the night anywhere but our own home. Sleepovers were unheard of, not only because you need friends for that, but because Ami was uncomfortable with the idea of leaving us beyond her supervision overnight. We spent the night utterly elated, playing board games and watching movies. When our parents went to sleep, my friends decided to pop a new scary movie into the VCR. Predator. When I said I lived a sheltered childhood, I meant it. A few moments into the film, I was utterly terrified. Even my friends' teasing would not coax me back to the television. I went to my bed and tried to fall asleep. My dreams that night were fitful, full of manhunts, red dots, and unbearable Austrian accents. I woke up more tired than when I had gone to bed. The next morning, after a Pakistani-Scottish breakfast fit for kings, Ami thanked Auntie as she stood by the door. They waited until Abba and Uncle were out of earshot, speaking furtively. Ami didn't mind me being nearby because she knew I hadn't had much sleep, and I always clung to her when I was out of sorts. Auntie spoke while looking toward the street, her tone very matter-of-fact. "It's daytime now. You can tell me what he saw. Some dreams you don't share even in the daytime. So this was the answer to the riddle. Abba had seen a dream. In our culture, dreams are carefully considered because, as a well-known hadith teaches, the dreams of the faithful are prophetic. In fact, dreams are the only means I know of by which the average Muslim expects to hear directly from God. There is good reason for this expectation. Dreams often did come true. Abba had many prophetic dreams. One example was when he was enlisted. He had to take a test for purposes of promotion to petty officer first class. The day of his test, he had a dream that he and 5 of his friends were in a battlefield under heavy fire. There was a fence in the distance, and they had to make it over the fence to be safe. All 6 of them took off running. Abba made it over the fence first, and another friend made it over after him. The other 4 didn't make it. A few weeks later, when he got his successful test scores back, he found out that the same 5 friends had all taken the test, and the only other one who passed was the one who made it over the fence in the dream. Nani Ammi once had a recurrent dream about her father shortly after he passed away and was buried. He was knocking on her door and asking her for help, totally soaked by the rain. After having the dream on 3 successive nights, she decided to visit his grave. When she arrived, she found that an animal had burrowed a hole into his grave, and the monsoon rains had flooded it. In my family alone, people have had clairvoyant dreams of sicknesses, miscarriages, births, deaths, and a host of other events. A dream was no matter to take lightly, especially one that might portend an avoidable calamity. Auntie could tell Ami needed to share Abba's dream with someone, so she asked again, "I want to give sadka and pray for you. Tell me what he saw." Ami relented. "Okay, I'll tell you, but I'm not sure what it means, and don't tell anyone else. 2 nights ago, he had a dream. We were all in the car, driving down a dark road. The road was very narrow, and there was fire on both sides. It was a dark fire, one that emitted no light. He couldn't see anything at all. When he turned around to check on Baji and Nabeel in the back seat, they were gone." Ami fell silent and watched Abba and Uncle as they stood by the car. Still matter of fact, Auntie asked, "What do you think it means?" Ami responded, "Astaghfirullah, I don't want to think about it." "Then what happened on the road last night?" Ami hesitated before sharing. The long road to Dunoon is a treacherous drive, even in the daytime. We didn't think anything of it, though, until we were halfway home, when the streetlights went out. It was dark and too much like the dream. That's when we turned around. Whatever the dream meant, I think Allah saved us from it." Finally, Auntie turned to Ami with a smile. "Alhamdulillah. Let us thank Allah, do dua before you leave, offer sadka, and think no more of this. Call me when you arrive home so that I know everyone is safe." Ami smiled in return and hugged her. Auntie was a true friend. As we gathered around the car, both families offered dua together, silently praying for our safe and swift return home. Although this was standard procedure, it took on added meaning that morning. When we were in the car and out of the city, I asked Abba if he'd had a bad dream. He glanced at Ami, but she didn't say anything. "Yes, beta. I had a bad dream last night too, Abba Ja'an. It'll be okay." Abba chuckled. "There are different types of dreams, Bilu. What makes them different? When you have one that is from God, you will know." "Does Allah give you dreams a lot?" "Yes, beta, too many." That was the last we spoke of it. A few days later, Abba decided to pray to Allah and request that he stop seeing prophetic dreams. It has been over 20 years since then, and Abba hasn't received many dreams. I, on the other hand, would reach a point in my life when I spent many prostrate hours begging Allah for guidance through dreams. And as it turned out, Abba was right. When I got one, I knew it was from him. Chapter 10. The Month of Blessing. My years in Scotland were enchanted. My heart was captivated with the land and the people. Our home was situated on a hillside that often resounded with distant bagpipes on cold mornings. The mountains around Dunoon seemed to be carved for that very purpose. Blackberry bushes grew around our yard, just out of the reach of sheep grazing beyond barbed wire fence. I started my formal education at Sandbank Primary, the only school in our part of town, and I developed a few close friendships at the mosque. On more than one occasion we were invited to dinner by strangers, while stopped at a red light. I loved Scotland, and my affirmations of fondness for the country came with a thick Scottish accent. The Cold War was ending, however, which meant the nuclear submarine base was no longer needed. It was time for us to move again, and there was only one positive aspect to leaving Scotland that I could think of. Ramadan would be a lot easier. Ramadan is the Muslim holy month. For 30 days, Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset, not allowing any food or water to pass through their lips. This practice is obligatory for all able-bodied Muslims, which is why it is the fourth pillar of Islam. At the end of the 30 days, Muslims celebrate one of their two main holidays, Eid al-Fitr. Ramadan was awfully difficult in Scotland because of the length of the days. Scotland is so far north that it is just south of Iceland. During the Scottish summers, the sun rose as early as 4:30 in the mornings, and it set as late as 10 o'clock at night. If Ramadan happened to fall during the summer months, as it did while we lived there, then Muslims had to fast for about 18 hours a day. Not being able to eat for that long is bad enough, but the prohibition from drinking water is the most difficult injunction. To endure that for 30 days in a row is a test of fortitude and faith. But Islam is often not as rigid as some perceive it. For instance, there are exceptions to the fasting requirements. If a Muslim is sick, traveling, or otherwise incapable of fasting, he has options. One of them is to provide a meal for a poor person to meet his obligation, and then when he is able, he can make up for the missed fasts. As important as fasting is, it would be an unfortunate misunderstanding to think only about fasting when considering Ramadan. To Muslims, the holy month meant much more. It is a time to build community, restore broken relationships, strive for purity, and above all, strengthen one's faith. Relatives are invited, gifts are purchased, parties are prepared. Like a month-long Christmas, it is an extended time of celebration in Muslim lands around the world. The Islamic calendar is lunar, and it is difficult to predict exactly when Ramadan will start. There is usually a night of uncertainty. Every year I stood outside the house with Abba, staring at the sky with anticipation and excitement, hoping for the clouds to clear so that we could catch a glimpse of the moon. If there was a new moon, we bowed our heads and recited a memorized dua. Abba would then go to the kitchen and tell Ami the verdict. I cannot recall a time when she waited outside with us, because she'd always be preparing the next morning's food. There was a lot to prepare. We usually woke up an hour before sunrise. After wudu, we prayed up to 8 rakats of optional prayer before sitting down to eat. The meal before sunrise was called sehri, and it served the dual purpose of giving us energy for the day and starting our day in fellowship. Ami would be singing in the kitchen while preparing our food, usually praise songs for Allah or Muhammad. She would have the table set with our food. Yogurt and eggs were a sehri staple. But we could also expect chickpeas, lentils, chicken kebab, cereal, milk, juices, and whatever else Ami felt would complement the morning meal. When we came into the kitchen, she would start making roti or paratha, Pakistani flatbreads. She would insist that we would eat our flatbreads fresh and warm. Ami always loved serving food, but never was she happier than when she was serving her own family the sehri. She wouldn't sit down to eat until we were almost done, and she was sure that there was enough fresh bread for everyone. Throughout the sehri, we had our eyes on the clock. We placed on the refrigerator a Ramadan calendar that had the exact times for sunrise, so we knew when to stop eating. Just before it was time for the sun to rise, I would go to the prayer rugs and call out the adhan. Our family would continue eating and drinking until the adhan was finished. One morning, when it was time to give the adhan, Ami half-jokingly said, "Bilu, call the adhan slowly today. I need more time to eat." Even though the adhan is supposed to be solemn, I started it off as fast as I could, taking delight in Ami's amused yelp from the dining table. "Nabeel, you should be ashamed of yourself doing this to your mother." During the course of the day, Baji and I would be in school, and if Ami had even the slightest concern that the fast would interfere with our schooling, she didn't allow us to keep it. When we pointed out that our Muslim friends were fasting at their schools, she'd answer, "Am I their mother? You don't have to fast until you're old enough, and you're not old enough. You're just practicing. Maybe their mothers think they are old enough, but never compare yourself with other children." Even if she pretended she was angry, we knew Ami was never actually upset with our desire to fast. This was especially true because, like most Muslims, she made an exerted effort to be happy during Ramadan, and it worked. Ami spent her days during Ramadan reciting the Quran and praying, and that always seemed to revitalize her. She often read through the entire Quran twice during Ramadan, reading 2 of the 30 parts during the course of a day. In the evening, our family would often go to iftar dinners at the homes of people from our mosque. Iftar is the breaking of the fast, and this is the time when the whole community gathers and celebrates. In books of hadith it says that Muhammad used to open his fasts by first eating a date, so Muslims all around the world do the same thing. Of course, we usually ate our dates in the car on the way to the iftar, because we were running late. After opening the fast with just a date, the community prays the Maghrib prayer before eating the full meal in communion together. After some time for socializing, the adhan is then called again for Isha prayer, and after Isha, there is often a series of optional prayers that people pray during Ramadan called Taraweeh. Iftars at the local mosque usually have as the imam a hafiz, a man who has the entire Quran memorized. It is the goal of the imam to recite the entire Quran over the course of Ramadan during these Taraweeh prayers, and so these prayer sessions can sometimes last an hour or 2 per night. During the majority of the session, the worshippers stand silent, hands folded, listening to the recitation. When Taraweeh is over, everyone goes home, planning to wake again in just a few hours. In many places, Muslims go to a different home for iftar every night of Ramadan. It is generally the host's job to provide the meal, and that means that there will be more food than everyone can eat. The irony of Ramadan is that after binging on buffets every morning and every evening, people usually gain weight during the month of fasting. It wasn't until after we moved away from Scotland that I was allowed to start fasting regularly during Ramadan. We left Scotland in 1990 for a submarine base in Groton, Connecticut. There was no community mosque in Groton, and it never felt like home for me. I didn't make any good friends, and the most noteworthy occurrence was the tragedy of losing my Scottish accent. Scotland was where I learned all about being Muslim, and where I had fallen in love with my Islamic faith. We moved again 3 years later, this time back to Virginia. Abba was about to become Lieutenant Commander Qureshi, and he was never to be moved by the military again. Virginia Beach is where I made lasting friendships, where I came of age, and where I decided the direction of my future. It is where I first felt the sting of my Islamic culture clashing with my American environment. It was where I ultimately decided to leave Islam and everything I knew. To read an excerpt contribution on growing up Muslim in America by Abdu Murray, a lawyer, apologist, former Shia Muslim, and author of 2 published books on Islam and other major worldviews, see page 298. Appendix 1. Expert Contributions. Growing Up Muslim in America. Abdu Murray. Contributing to Part 1. Called to Prayer. Abdu Murray is a lawyer, apologist, and former Shia Muslim. Author of 2 published books on Islam and other major worldviews, he is currently president of Embrace the Truth International. In the salty white landscape of the Detroit suburb of my youth, my family was a dash of pepper. We stood out because, at that time, we were exotic, one of the few Muslim families in the area. And I took Islam seriously, so that I could stand out even more, because that would cause my friends to ask questions about my faith. That, in turn, would lead to opportunities to share what I considered to be the beauty and truth of Islam with the low-hanging fruit of the many non-Muslim, mostly Christian, individuals around me. I was like many Muslims I knew. Even as a youth, I loved talking about God and my Islamic faith. I was puzzled that the non-Muslims around me found it so uncomfortable to talk about matters of religion. Don't these Christians really believe their traditions? If their message is true, why are they so afraid to talk about it? The answer, I told myself, is that Christians know deep down that their religion is silly. They only need to be shown the truth of Islam to see the true path. Muslims get that kind of confidence from religious training received during their childhood and teen years. Most are students at the Informed Academy of the American Muslim Home. Our parents, uncles, and older relatives sit us down and teach us Muslim apologetics, the defense of the Muslim worldview. The Quran is the word of God, we are taught, because Muhammad was illiterate and could not have come up with such beautiful, profound language on his own. From this informal training, we come to believe that the Quran is proven to be miraculous because it contains scientific information and facts that have only recently been discovered. And we are told, time and time again, that the Quran we have today is exactly the same as we delivered to Muhammad, with no changes whatsoever, in 1400 years. Islam provides the best way to live a moral and just life. And on the teachings go. Those kinds of discussions are steady fare at a Muslim family's dinner table. But we also have a steady diet of polemics. From a young age, I was told that although Christians may mean well and may even sincerely follow their faith is fatally flawed. Their sacred texts were once the unadulterated Word of God, but they fell into hopeless corruption, and Christians had invented logically ridiculous doctrines like the divinity of Jesus and the Trinity. The Quran was revealed to Muhammad in 7th century Arabia to undo the harm caused by the biblical corruption and blasphemous teachings of Christianity. Muhammad's mission was to restore true religion, and it was my goal as a good Muslim to continue that mission. But equipping young people to spread what is believed to be the truth is not the sole motivation for this informal training. Muslims of earlier generations fear that the negative aspects of American culture could be a powerful, corrupting influence on successive generations. They fear their children will succumb to temptation and order their meals from the menu of illicit drug use, drunkenness, and wanton sexual promiscuity that they believe is characteristic of American life. But if young Muslims remain convinced of their Islamic beliefs, they will be better equipped to resist the temptations. As bad as these lifestyle pitfalls are, they pale in comparison to the ultimate dishonor of abandoning Islam, especially if it means becoming a Christian. Islam is not just a set of religious beliefs, it is an all-encompassing identity. It is inconceivable to change that identity, even for those who barely practice their Islamic faith. To do so is like suicide. It kills the identity of the convert and leaves the rest of the family in a state of shameful mourning. A healthy diet of apologetics and polemics spiced with cultural pride, it is believed, can help prevent that disaster. And young Muslims are convinced by their families that being a Muslim means to affirm Muhammad's prophethood and the Quran's divine origin, while at the same time resisting the very idea of becoming anything else, especially a Christian. Most Christians have a hard time imagining what it is like to live with the tension of blending in with American society while maintaining a Muslim identity. And so most don't understand the difficulty Muslims have in even considering that the Gospels might be true. I thank God that there are those precious, and all too few, Christians who exhibit Jesus' love and caring in their actions and who thoughtfully proclaim the beauty and truth of the Gospel in their words. God uses them to carefully navigate the waters of spiritual discussion without running aground, well, as little as possible. Like so many Muslims who eventually give their lives to Christ, it took me quite some time to embrace the truth, though that truth is worth embracing despite the tremendous price I paid. I knew that fully embracing the person and work of Jesus Christ would cost me the very identity that had been forged for me at the dinner tables of the Muslim community. Until I was able to see that Christ is worth the cost, I was not willing to pay it. But eventually, I understood what the famed Jim Elliot, who lost his life in service of the gospel, meant when he wrote, He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose. Eliot rephrased Paul's words that, "For his sake I have suffered the loss of all things, and count them as rubbish, in order that I may gain Christ." Philippians chapter 3, verse 8, ESV. Yet the price that Jesus paid for us dwarfs whatever price we might pay to follow him. C.S. Lewis wrote that God's love for us is quite relentless in its determination that we shall be cured of our sins, at whatever cost to us, at whatever cost to him. Following such a God is worth sacrificing our identities so that we can be given a new one that looks more and more like Jesus. Since giving my life to Jesus, the table set before me is quite different. Before, I gobbled up superficial answers that left my stomach gnawing and my throat parched. But in Christ, my hunger is fed by the bread of life, and my thirst is slaked by the living water who satisfies eternally.